Hello, everyone, and thank you for being part of Friendship Place's next webinar in our series of webinars in which we discuss topics of relevance and importance to the work that we do. We are so happy to be joined here today by Dr. Sherry Hamby, and who's just written this book on, I don't know if you can see it with my blurred screen, Stronger Than You Think, Building Lifelong Resistance, which is, and I can say this personally because I have read it, wonderful and really worthwhile. So definitely, I will drop the link in the chat for you all to take a look here. But I'm going to pass along to Jean-Michel right now, who will then talk to Saul, who's going to facilitate this conversation. And as always, we encourage people to come with your own questions as things come up. This is always much greater when it comes about organically. But as always, I also have lots of questions I might ask myself here. So, Saul, I'm going to throw it to you, good sir.
I'm gonna bounce it to JM. I think he's gonna
Oh,
say something.
Jean-Michel, sorry. Thank you. Sorry, Jean-Michel, you go right ahead.
It's live. It's fine. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Saul. Good morning or good afternoon by now, everybody, and thank you for being online with us. We are delighted to have Dr. Hamby and Saul Corbin with us today to discuss her book. Um, Dr. Hamby, Sol and I participate in the Resilience Conference in Nashville, and Dr. Hamby is the main organizer of this wonderful conference, which is such a safe space to listen to academic studies and just bring for us our experience in the field. So I want to thank you for that, Sherry. Dr. Hamby's work represents a shift in the way we look at resilience building in the field. And this shift is actually very much in keeping with our own practices at Friendship Place. So we wanted to share this body of work with you through this webinar today. I'm not going to go on too long, but Sol Corbin and I, of course, are conference partners going way back, traveling to conferences throughout the country to present our models, our approaches at Friendship Place, and to help move the field forward, the field of homeless services forward in our own small way. So, Sol, you are going to facilitate the call. I'm going to turn this over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, JM. Thank you, Chris. Thank you for being here. Dr. Hamby has asked us to call her Sherry in this space, so we're going to respectfully do that, but not to minimize her accomplishments. I am not a bio reader. That's kind of a plastic introduction for me, so I'm going to personalize it as much as possible while including some of the bullets from her bio. As Jean-Michel said, we actually came across this. This is when I was still employed with Friendship Place pre-COVID, and Jean-Michel and I were trying to build up our portfolio of conferences that we presented at. And I don't even know how or why Resilience Con came across my email, but it did. I jumped at it. We were graciously accepted, and we've been going every year since then. And it's a wonderful conference on strengths-based approaches to overcoming trauma. It's primarily academic, and Jean-Michel and I were a little concerned about that because we're not academic or research based. But Sherry's response to us was, hey, we need more practice reps like you at the conference. We need to build their attendance as well. So it was welcomed, and it's just a conference that we love going to every year. She is a distinguished research professor of psychology. She is the director of the Life Path Research Center and founder of the aforementioned Resilience Con. She has authored or co-authored over 200 articles and 5 books, of which the current one she's going to be talking about today. She is a wife. She is a mother. She is an animal lover. She has a TED Talk out there called Trauma is Everywhere, but so is Resilience. I consider her a colleague and also also a friend. And we want this space to be interactive. She, of course, is going to share some of her experiences with you, but we're also want to open up the space for interaction, as Chris suggested. So please be generous with your questions and or comments. So with all that said, I am turning it over to Dr. Sherry Hamby. Sherry, all yours.
No. Well, thank you so much, Sal and Jean-Michel and Chris for all of that. I really appreciate those generous generous introductions. And thanks so much for being here today. I'm really excited to talk to you all. And I just want to share with you a little bit of my journey into this work on resilience and what I think are some of the most important things that we've learned. And Chris expressed an interest in thinking about how you can apply it to yourself and your ability to sustain our role as providers and first responders and people who are kind of in these spaces where we're getting a lot of secondary exposure to trauma in our work, as well as what we might do with our clients. So I'm going to try to touch on that as we go through. So basically, just to kind of step back and take the eagle eye view for a minute, I started off in graduate school in the 1980s and 1990s. And at that time, what was happening in the field, maybe some of you might remember this yourself, is that they were really applying the tools of science to understanding different kinds of trauma for the first time. So there was all this really impactful research on domestic violence, on child abuse, on bullying, on sexual assault, on historical trauma, all different kinds of traumatic experiences. And pretty much what they found every single solitary time is that all of these problems were much more common than we had previously envisioned, so much more common than was getting reported to authorities, and also much more harmful than we had previously envisioned, especially by the time some of the work on adverse childhood experiences by Vince Felitti and his colleagues, or some of the work that I did with David Finkelhor and Heather Turner on polyvictimization, just realizing that these impacts were touching our lives in lots of different ways, and that even people who were in their 50s or 60s or 70s or even older, you could still see how they were being impacted by experiences that they'd had as a child, not only in terms of things like depression or PTSD, but also in terms of things like heart disease and cancer and diabetes. And so just realizing that this was a massive public health problem. But one of the limitations of that, and when I finally got better at listening to my clients, my students, my loved ones, is that all of that information is great. And it was really impactful. I mean, it had a huge impact on all of our societies around the world. All of this investment in domestic violence shelters, rape crisis hotlines, anti-bullying programs in schools. I mean, I could go on and on about all of the things that we basically created and invested in because of all of this data. But it doesn't really tell you that much about how to feel better, because just knowing that a problem is a really big problem does not tell you how to solve the problem. And that is something that has really been surprisingly kind of missing from a lot of the work that gets done in this area in terms of the research. And I think that one of the results of that is that it leaves people who are trying to provide services with having to make some maybe guess is kind of a strong word, but I think, basically guesses about what would help people feel better that don't tie in that directly to what we have learned from the science. And so that's what we have tried to do with our work. We've gotten very interested in this question about what helps people the most when they're trying to overcome trauma. And we've come up with this framework called resilience portfolios. And I think one of the things that it really helps with is that in our current climate, we are just drowning in all kinds of wellness advice and all kinds of psychological advice. And some of it is very good advice. It's perfectly sound advice. It's very, scientifically grounded. Some of it's not. Some of it is really terrible advice and toxic advice. And there's all these crazy influencers out there, coming up with these things that really are just setting people up for failure and more problems. And although I was reading an article yesterday that I really think we need to pay more attention to those people because that has become a major source of psychological information for so many people, and they're going off and doing like 75 hard or whatever, and these things that are just not evidence-based tools at all. But what's missing from all of that, like even if you could somehow weed out all the toxic stuff and just focus on the good advice, there's still too much of it. I mean, there's no way that any one of us, even, ourselves, our clients, I mean, it doesn't matter who you're talking about, we can't possibly do all of this advice. And so there's not really a guideline for wading through it. And so the purpose of the resilience portfolio model is to start to give people some kind of framework that they can use to approach their lives or even their communities or their families or other kinds of groups, and think about what pieces do you need to have in place to put together a good life, and not just to keep doubling down on the same things over and over again. I mean, I think the biggest mistake with most of the resilience advice and wellness advice out there is that it focuses way too much on what's just one of the four domains in our model, and that's regulation. And, we're just always getting told we need to exercise more, we need to eat healthier, we need to manage our time better, we need to declutter our closets, we need to engage, for providers, we're always getting all these messages about how we need to be spending more time on self-care, but there's never any really guideline about how you're going to cram all that stuff into your life. And that stuff, it's not that it doesn't have any importance at all. I mean, we obviously all have to, clean our bathrooms and do our laundry, and those things are important, but it's you can't really get to a good life just by regulating like crazy. And you can have, all your laundry can be folded and pressed and put away, and your house can be sparkling, and you can be, refusing to let like one mouthful of junk food pass your lips or whatever, and that's not in itself going to be a good life. And so the portfolio approach is to try to give people more guidance about what they really need to have in their lives. And I'm just gonna really briefly walk through each of the four domains and give an example from each one, just so we can kind of flesh it out, so that, and then open up the time to have a conversation with Saul and with the rest of you. So the meaning making domain is probably the most important domain. I thought when I was getting into this work, because we've looked at more than 60 different kinds of strengths and resources that people can have in their life, and I thought it was going to be really hard to narrow it down. But it's turned out that the ones that keep coming out as the most powerful predictors in our study are in the meaning making domain, and especially like a sense of purpose and hope. And so that's having some kind of mission in life, like my mission to reduce the global burden of trauma. If you're working on homelessness, to work on the problem of getting everybody housing, or I mean, like there's some sort of mission. It can be a role like parent or teacher. And I think for just to connect back to that question of what, how we can think about it for our provider roles too. I've been giving that a lot of thought recently, and I think that one of the biggest problems that we come up with in a lot of our professional settings is it's really easy to adopt the mission of your organization or start spending all your time working on the mission of your organization and forgetting your own mission. And it doesn't mean that that's a bad mission. So like I'm in a university setting now, and I have been for some time, and and I do endorse the mission of the university, but it has really helped me in the last few years to get clarity on how the mission of the university is not to reduce the global burden of trauma. I mean, they're not pro trauma, they're not like, yay, trauma, go trauma, or anything like that. But that's not where they invest all of their resources and assets into trying to do that. They're trying to educate young people. I'm at a liberal arts college. I think they're very invested in preserving the tradition of the liberal arts. And like I said, those are great missions. They're perfectly good missions, and they're missions that I totally endorse and maybe on my own list. Maybe there's somewhere around like 8 or 9 or 10 or something like that. But they're not my number one mission. And I think you can find yourself getting sucked into doing other people's missions, and that can be something that really makes it hard to sustain this work over time. In the interpersonal domain, one of the things that we have learned that has been, I think, the most interesting and useful did come from a project on uh, frontline providers, because I had a student whose mom was an ICU nurse. Her name is Selena Piercy, and she did a scoping review of all of the research on resilience among ICU nurses. And one of the things that we found was that they talked a lot about social leisure more than social support. So if you dive into the victimization literature, everybody talks about social support, but they mostly mean giving help and assistance and comfort to people who were distressed instead of what they meant by social leisure, which was making sure that they were carving time out in their lives to just spend enjoyable time with people that they cared about, that they were having dinner with family or friends or watching a movie or whatever. I've read thousands of articles about survivors of different kinds of violence, and I'd never seen that come up in any of those other papers. But we created a measure to try to capture that, and we've now rolled that out in a couple of studies. In fact, we've got more data on that now than it has in the book. And that has already vaulted into like the top 5 or 6 factors that seem to be most important for people to reach thriving. And I think that the other thing I want to say about that is because I think this is something that comes up as a problem too, is I think one thing that's really beautiful about that as well is that it shows that the things that we need, the things that we need as we're therapists or community advocates or social workers or whatever sort of, role we have like that, are not really that different from what our clients need. And I think sometimes we really forget that because we get sucked into these manualized curricula or whatever. And sometimes those curricula are really pushing things that I would never want to do on my own. Like, I don't want to fill out those worksheets, and so I think this is a good lesson just to show that the things that help providers are the same things that are going to help other people too. And then in the environment, I was trained as a clinical psychologist, and so I was very slow to I thought I was doing really good for the first several years we were working on this model, that we had that interpersonal domain in there, because probably, as some of you know, a lot of the resilience literature is just very focused on individuals and puts all the burden for healing and recovery on the survivor. And but I realized, Vicky Banyard and I are my main colleague in this work. We realized a few years into this that while we were capturing the social ecology, that we weren't looking at the physical ecology. And there is now just this ton of research on nature-based interventions, especially, and how bringing the wonder of the natural environment into your life, and not just the wonder of it. It's not just a psychological process, but we co-evolved in those green spaces, you know. I mean, humans have developed in Homo sapiens developed in environments that are very different from the ones that most of us live in now. And there's all kinds of really fascinating work being done about how, getting in touch with those biomes is really beneficial for ourselves in all kinds of ways that contribute to us. Um, and the current literature, somebody did a review on it recently. This team from Scotland shows that probably to really sustain your well-being, you should be getting at least 2 hours a week in green and blue spaces. I live in a very rural area. I get way more than that, and that seems like a low number to me, but at least that much. And I think that that's the kind of thing that we could integrate into a lot of our therapeutic and community spaces more than we do. And the great thing about it is that when you do that, you can potentially help, way more people than you can from just, one at a time services. And then I'll come back to the last domain is the regulatory domain, as I mentioned. And I just want to say that we've looked at a lot of different factors that kind of relate to that sort of toughness or grit stuff. We've looked at perseverance and determination and impulse control and self-reliance and lots of different kinds of measures and lots of different samples and many different we've studied this in 10 different countries now and other communities within countries. And none of those are in the top 10. I mean, they're just not even close. I mean, a lot of them are way down at the bottom of the pack out of this 60 or so. But the regulatory one that I've that I'm the most excited about is one that we learned from talking to people in focus groups in my small town here. And that's positive emotion regulation because almost all of the clinical literature and the scientific literature on emotion regulation focuses on negative emotions. It focuses on sadness or anger or distress. But, I mean, and this is, I think, a classic problem in symptom-focused therapy too, is like taking away symptoms or taking away negative emotions. I mean, that doesn't mean that you're in the good space, right? I mean, not being angry is not the same as being happy or joyful or amused or whatever, or like experiencing any of those positive emotions. And what they told us in these focus groups is that learning how to cheer themselves up, as the phrase that they use way more than positive emotion regulation, that's just my jargon for it, but uh, that's what made the difference for them in the long haul and learning not to let every hassle and setback really get to them. And people did that in lots of different ways. Some people played music or listened to music or played video games or for me a lot of people talked about things or what's probably like my number one strategy here. They like to go for walks with their dogs. I'm a big dog lover and I give my dogs a lot of credit for my supporting my emotional well-being. But I do think that that is really important. And then that is another one that we developed a measure for, and it has just vaulted into that elite group of like our top 5 or 6 best predictors. And I think that that's the kind of skills that we should, if we're going to teach skills, which I don't think is always the thing we should only be focusing on, like those are the kinds of skills we should be emphasizing instead of some of this, you know, cognitive restructuring and things like that that we do, which is better than nothing, but that's not the same as saying it's like the best that we can to offer. And like I said, I think that what this leaves you with is an opportunity, either with a client that you're working with or in your own life, to try to take a little assessment of yourself. And in the book, there's all different kinds of exercises to do this and prompts and questions and to figure out where you are in each of those domains, where you might already be strong, where you'd like to work on. And so instead of just trying to do like every single solitary wellness suggestion that's out there, then you can kind of figure, target more directly where you want to work and where you're already strong. So like the example I already give is like, if you're already run 5 miles a day, I mean, bless you if you do. I hate running, but if you're the kind of person that already likes to run, then you may not get that much more bang from your buck by adding yoga to that in terms of the psychological impact. I mean, obviously, it's yoga is great. I like yoga way better than I like running. But that's all going to be in the regulatory bucket. And so, you might want to try to think about like the other buckets, like have you let some of your relationships fall by the wayside, or maybe you want to explore, where you want to go with the next step of your career or your life, or if they're students, like what do they want to, pursue, and do some journaling or narrative exercises around that, or maybe you need to get back to nature more, and so that we're not just uh, thinking uncritically about every single recommendation, but instead thinking about where this would fit in with our own resilience portfolio and how that might work. And then I will stop there so we have plenty of time for discussion. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Sherry. Always learn something new when I listen to you, and I've heard you speak many, many times. But the thing that resonated with me the most before I turn it over to our audience for questions and comments, and if the room is silent, Chris, I trust you will jump in there with your list of questions that you've
I
already.
got 8 questions ready to go.
All right,
All righty.
excellent.
So let me just really acknowledge, and this is the work that I do in supporting uh, folks out there who are doing support work, is that you kind of got to know yourselves first, right? Before you're trying to meet other people's needs. When you put yourself in the role of helper, you're already setting up a power dynamic that's unspoken, right? Because you are the agent to support, and they have to come to you to get that. But we often forget about that dynamic because we have big hearts and we're in service work. But knowing ourselves, which includes self-care and includes wellness, is part of that. The more we take care of ourselves, the better we can then provide for the folks that we are supporting. And I really, really appreciate you saying that there's not a lot of difference between the participant needs and the provider needs, right? Sometimes I think maybe even subconsciously that's a look down kind of
Yeah.
thing. Like maybe we assume their plates are more full than ours. That's not always the case, and we need to look more specifically at our needs, and then being able to see that in theirs and how we would want to approach them. Thank you for letting me share. I'm going to open it up. Please either put it in the chat, unmute yourself. There's no order to this unless you raise your hand, in which I'll call on you. And if none of you speak up, Chris Rutledge, it is all you.
Yeah.
Well,
Can I just chime in real
Yeah,
quick about
yeah.
something you said there? Yeah, I appreciate all those comments. And one thing that this resilience portfolio work has done is because just deep into it all the time, is that sometimes it offers things that you're not necessarily looking for. And I realize that this is a good way to think about what a provider is, and it has really changed my understanding of a provider. So now my definition of a provider is somebody whose resilience portfolio is so robust that they have resources to spare to help other people. And I think because and I think that that kind of helps capture. I mean, we all know these sort of natural helpers in our community that seem to be able to do so much for people, even if they're not in some kind of official provider role. And then we all know some people that even though maybe they are, a therapist or a nurse or a teacher or whatever, that they are just so stretched thin that they're not able to do the work anymore. And I think that this is one way of thinking about that, because you do have to make, it's that sort of, put your own oxygen mask on before you try to help somebody else. And you've just got to make sure that you are that you're in pretty good shape in all four of those domains, ideally, before you try to go out there and give resources away to other people.
And Sherry, I've literally sat in spaces where I was in the provider or support role. And it was clear I was the only one in the room that knew this, but I was in more need of the people that were in there at the time. But nobody knew that. They assumed because I was in the provider role that my stuff was together. And I was like, boy, if anybody knew, really knew. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that. Thank you, Sherry. Let's go to Chris.
Yeah, well, actually, I was going to say Emily dropped a question in the chat, and maybe we'll start with that. Are there training modules for staff and volunteers that take this approach? And do we know of anything that we share? What do we share with our own staff, Jean-Michel, Saul, and what can we offer staff and volunteers that help take this approach?
Well, I do have longer workshops that I do that take this approach. I have half day workshops and full day workshops and even a 2 day version that Vicky and I have done before. So we do have training modules that do that, and then we did do an online class last year, and we're going to be trying to find time to do that online again. But right now, I mean, it's one of the things that's on my list, but I don't have any like self-guided, online trainings that are set up right now. But thank you for reminding me that I should be prioritizing getting some of that ready. And of course, you can read the book. Like if you read the book, you're gonna be an expert on this by the time you finish.
Well, I'll ask my question then. We talked about vicarious trauma, and in the book, you speak a lot about it in terms of first responders. But it occurs to me that the folks who work with our participants, our staff members, they also experience it. They're dealing with folks at
Mm.
very difficult times. I mean, what in your experience, how well do nonprofits that serve people in need do with serving the needs of staff? What have you seen that's worked well? What do you think that could be done better?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a challenge for most nonprofits, and unfortunately, it's been my experience that it just depends so much on who the executive director is and the other people in who are organizing things. I was doing a talk for the American Association of University Women last weekend, and I was telling them in the university environment, uh, that always just seems like the first thing to go, like things that are supporting staff. And the example that I gave, I know this is going to sound like the smallest, maybe even like pettiest example that I'm still mad about this because it was like 15 years ago that it happened. But I've been here at Sewanee since 2008. And at the time when I first came here, they gave a free lunch at the cafeteria, at the school cafeteria for everybody on faculty, and they were trying to promote faculty student interactions. And at that point in time, I think it really promoted lots of people going. You would just go all, and then but then they had a budget crisis because they're always, I mean, every year they have a budget crisis, and they always act like this is like, this new budget crisis. And I'm like, is it really a new budget crisis or is it just the same one that you have every year? And that was one of the things that they took away. And I could come up with other examples too, but I've seen that in nonprofit. I used to be on the board of a domestic violence shelter in North Carolina. And I do think that uh, executive director was more invested in trying to support the staff there, but I think it was the same thing that it just always felt like something extra. It always felt like something expendable when the budget was getting tight. And of course, I'm sure, as most of you know, if you're running on grant funds, it's really hard to put those kinds of support for that kind of stuff into grant budgets. And they're getting so chintzy about you even, I mean, some of the federal stuff, you can't even buy bottles of water on the federal grant budget. But I do think that, and the other example that I gave is that I'm old enough to remember when faculty and staff retreats used to be actual retreats. Like you'd go to some nice park somewhere and everybody would have a picnic and maybe you'd play volleyball or board games or karaoke or something like that. And it was actual downtime and it was actual opportunity for people to, just hang out and maybe get to know each other a little bit better, or maybe, or a lot, most of the time, families would get invited so you could meet the rest of, and just like you were saying, Sal, like get to see people in a little bit more three dimensions and not assume that they're this, perfectly composed person sitting in front of you all the time. And now when we have faculty retreats, they've just turned into all day meetings and they just cram it full of all of these agenda items that they feel like they haven't been able to get into the regular staff meeting. And, everybody dreads them. I mean, and not just here. I mean, almost everybody I know, that's what it's turned into. And they're like, oh my God, I mean, now, it's like now retreats become like a dirty word, but it used to be a nice word. And so I think that those kinds of things are incredibly important. And even if you have to make it a potluck or something like that, just to have opportunities in the workspace so that it's not like someone giving up their Saturday, but like take some Friday afternoon and instead of doing whatever it is you normally do on a Friday afternoon, like just come and, yeah, just hang out and play some games or do something like that. I just think that that kind of social leisure is so important. And then, having supervision built into it too, and not just assuming that it's up to everybody else. In the reviews that we've done on providers, and besides the one on nurses, I have a student who's doing one on teachers right now. Uh, having that dedicated investment in supervision has really been a key factor that has emerged.
Very good.
Good.
Emily, you asked the question in the chat. What
Oh
about
yeah.
stress management training for staff to help them with self-regulation in challenging? Oh, sorry, didn't read the whole question there. But anyway, I think situations. So what can we do about that?
So I am really anti all kinds of psychoeducation. I have the lowest of low opinions about any kind of psychoeducation program. I don't think that most of them are evidence-based practice, because if you're just giving, I mean, a lot of times it just assumes that people don't have that information. And, and most of the time, the reason that people aren't managing their stress or doing their homework or not, or continuing to misuse substances or whatever it is that they're doing that you don't want them to do. It's not because they don't know that there should be something different happening. It's that they don't have the resources to make something different happen. So if you wanted to offer something to help with the staff stress levels, then I think that way better than just giving them some brochures on self-care and stuff like that, which do not have a measurable impact, or even having like a 1 hour or 2 hour session that kind of runs through those types of brochures, is that you should start offering. I mean, the easiest thing to do, I think, well, maybe easy is not the nice thing to say about it, but I think a very plausible thing to do in a lot of settings would be to try, for example, to bring mindfulness into the work setting. So at the beginning of every staff meeting, that you just spend 5 minutes on a mindfulness, session, or you offer, or get somebody. You could probably get somebody from another nonprofit to come in, and or maybe you even have somebody at your nonprofit who already has these skills, like, offer to do a yoga class, like after, the lunch break on Thursdays or something like that. So instead of just telling them, hey, it would be great if you started practicing mindfulness, or hey, it would be great if you started doing yoga, that you actually like start offering that within the confines of the workday, even if it's only like, 5 or 10 minutes here or there, or a 15-minute yoga break, when, those kinds of things do make a measurable real impact. And it's doesn't, it may not seem like a big switch, but it is all the difference between whether it makes an impact on your staff or it doesn't. And one of the things we learned from the nurses that I think is also catching on in a lot of places. I don't know if any of you watch The Pit. I love that TV show. Y'all, yeah, see if you're like, um, they did a version of it there, but there's they call it a sacred pause. So if you're in a situation where they did it on one episode of The Pit when somebody died, and so then that is the context. It's developed mostly in hospitals, I think, where there has been a tragic death or a loss of some kind, and just to give people 5 minutes to sort of process that, just to, I mean, in the hospital setting, like the usual way that works is the family comes, the staff comes, it's a chance for, sometimes it's led by the chaplain or the social worker or something like that. People going to say a few words about that. If the family feels like thanking the staff for their efforts, they can do that. And it just gives people a chance to kind of acknowledge the life that was before them and not just run off and try to, 30 seconds later be able to completely switch gears. And so I don't know in your different spaces what that necessarily look like for you, but I think that that is a gaining traction as a very promising intervention for people who are working in places where you do have to deal with the tragedy of different kind on a regular basis.
If I could jump in there, Sherry, I really appreciate that because it's not, like you said, it's not just having the information, it's or the resources or the connections to access it, right? And probably the most impressive conference that I ever went to outside of Resilience Con was, and John Michelle was there with me. We were in New Orleans at I'm just going to say an HR conference, and they devoted the whole floor of the hotel to just mindfulness and wellness. And each room had a different activity, and even
Yeah,
things you
cool.
hadn't heard of, like ear acupuncture. It was amazing, and you could go up there at any time and access those services. And then, with regards to Friendship Place, one of the retreats that we had staff retreats, we brought in an expert on how to do exercise right at your desk at work. So chair exercises and things like that. And the staff just ate it up
Yeah.
because it's practical. It's here and now. It's present. Things you can take with you that you can do rather than, well, there's a gym down the street. So, anyways, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna turn it back over to anybody else that may have questions or comments. Great stuff.
I got another one if you want.
Yeah,
I jump
sure.
in.
Oh, I love those examples, Saul. Yeah, those are great.
So my next question was, you talk in the book about the power of storytelling as a way of
Hmm.
unloading or sharing your experience and thus I don't want to say purging yourself of the trauma, but helping to get it out there. We obviously, and again, I represent the fundraising team, and so we oftentimes will leverage participant stories as a way of sharing within the community. And I struggle sometimes. Are we exploiting or are we giving people an opportunity to tell their story and thus unburden themselves? And I was hoping you might be able to speak to the power of storytelling a little bit to make me feel better at the very least.
Yeah, I do think it is so important for people's own healing journey. But, I mean, I think it's all just about letting people maintain control over their narrative. I mean, that's what something I say to people all the time, like you're in control of your narrative. And so when we do, groups, I was there were some staff changes and I'm not doing it anymore, but I was running a group, a narrative group at the local jail on the women's side, have done a few times. Uh, and so when invite them to tell their story, and then I just always like, you're in control of your narrative. I mean, we give you the prompt. It's the same thing I tell people when we're doing interviews for research purposes. Like if you don't want to tell something, then think of a different story or think of a different answer to that prompt. But what I have found, I think is probably what you have found too, is that a lot of people really love the opportunity to have this safe
Mhm.
space to tell their story. And they really want, I mean, I think sometimes it's easy for us to forget how filled with meaning our own work is. And so, for most of us, I'm sure for probably almost all of you who are here on this right now, there's a lot of really low-hanging fruit to have very meaningful engagement with what you're doing full time. But a lot of people don't always have that in a way. I mean, they work at a fast food restaurant or whatever, and and it's they're what they spend a lot of their time doing is not necessarily all that tied into meaning making values for them. And we have found that a lot of people, this is a big opportunity for them to feel like they are participating in something they care about, which is hoping that they can make a difference in helping other people not have to go through what they went through. So I think, uh, if they want to do it and if they feel like sharing their story, then that's great to offer them that opportunity. And I think uh, it is really important. I mean, and this is something that I had to work on a lot because I love numbers. I love statistics. Last week, I mean, I was so busy with the launch of the book that last week, for the first time in some weeks, I sat down and spent a couple hours with one of my uh, with colleagues on running some analyses, and I was like, oh, I miss doing this. But but for on the fundraising kind of thing, I mean, it's important to have those numbers if people want them, but I don't think you can really, it's hard to change the world with just numbers. So I do think it is important
Mhm.
to find people who do want to participate that way with you and who believe in your mission and want to contribute to it. And I imagine that probably a lot of the people you've worked with are excited about that and that you're really giving them a gift of getting the chance to participate in that meaning making.
No, thank you.
So now I know that Chris and I have had some questions and comments, and thank you, Emily, for yours as well. Let me just encourage everybody else. Feel free to unmute yourselves or put something in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. And if not, Chris and I and Jan will keep, and Emily will keep going.
I'll give people another moment, but I got something else.
Just go ahead. Well, if they
All
jump in,
right.
that we can.
Well, well, thank you. So you again, you talk in the book about the power of helping others, and that's a way of helping to heal your own trauma. How do you find, how does one find the energy to help somebody, knowing that helping somebody else is a great way to provide meaning for your life? How do you find the energy, the wherewithal to help others when you yourself are dealing with a crisis, either immediate or recent or significant? I mean, how do you find that energy?
Well, I mean, I think that you do have to. I talk about this in the book a little bit. I think that we do all, we wax and wane in where we are developmentally. And I mean, if you're taking care of an infant, then that just may not be the time of life when you are going to be out there engaging in a lot of community activism. And you might need to, figure out that that's a time to step back and not take on as many responsibilities as you normally do. And especially, I mean, in the United States, especially, we're so terrible about family and medical leave. I mean, it's going to, infants are really high demand little projects for a lot longer than the 6 weeks or 12 weeks that you might get off for your job. Or, at a different developmental stage. I mean, if you're really involved in taking care of your parents, and I think that we it would be great. I mean, in late stage capitalism, where we don't make a lot of spaces for those kinds of things, but we do have different levels of availability at different times. But I guess for me, I mean, if I'm dealing with something, I just I that's meaningful to me. It does help motivate me to work on some of the regulatory stuff, and I just try to work on my sleep hygiene, and I try to get better. I guess one thing I would say about all that is that I try to get better at saying no. And if you'd asked me 10 years ago or 20 years ago, which where I was already like a mid-career professional, if I was good at, because especially I think for a lot of women, that can be a challenge in a lot of settings. I would have said, "Oh yeah, I know how to say no." But I realized that I actually really stunk at saying no, and because I could say no to something that because I would it would only take like a couple of little things, like if it was like a project that I thought sounded like a worthy project, or if it was with working with somebody that I respected, or if it was working, or even if it was just working with somebody that I thought was really nice and I didn't want to hurt their feelings, that I would just find myself agreeing to participate in all of these things. And now I realize that maybe it's just because I've gotten older and I'm just starting to realize that my time is limited and that there are a lot of very nice people doing very worthy projects, and I just can't help them all. Uh, and just getting clearer. It's made a big difference to me in the last few years to talk about what I was talking about at the beginning, is just recognizing what my own mission is, and that I am, privileged to be in places where lots of other people have very noble and worthy missions too, but they're not my mission, and I have to be careful about how much help I give to projects that aren't really my project. But that could be different at a different career stage, because when I was a young professional, uh, you know, I mean, maybe working on something that's not your number one thing gives you the chance to learn from somebody who's really brilliant, and you really would benefit. You mean the benefit would outweigh the investment. But I think what happened to me is that I was too slow to make that transition and to realize that, okay, this person does really great work, but I actually already pretty much know how to do what they know how to do, and I don't need to, learn, and I think I was slow to kind of recognize where where I was really getting new skills and opportunities, and where I was just agreeing to do things because it seemed like the nice thing to do. So I guess that's what I would say, is that just to maybe do a check-in about whether you have stretched yourself too thin if you are
Mhm.
dealing with a lot of things, and thinking about what can you take off of your plate in a gentle and loving way that.
Yeah. Thank you, Sherry. We might have time for maybe one more question, but Sherry, if you could please put your contact info in the chat, that would be
Sure.
wonderful, so people could reach out to you personally if they choose. Chris had put the link to the book in the chat. If you could redo that, Chris, for anybody that might have come in later, that would be good. And we want to hear from, before we close out here, JM, and then Chris, if you'll land us um, with whatever final comments. Sherry, is there anything in terms of takeaways that you would like to leave us with before we go to JM and Chris? And if anybody else has anything they want to ask, now would be the time. Otherwise, I'm going to initiate that sequence.
Yeah, I guess I just want to leave with that anybody can get better at resilience, and that it's not really just about toughness and pushing through, but about having a very diverse portfolio of assets and resources that anybody at any point in the lifespan can really get better at. And then I hope that this all gives you some ideas about thinking about your own resilience portfolios and the people that you work with. And thanks again, of course, for inviting me here today.
JM?
Well, I want to thank you, Sherry, for making time to be with us today. We know you're extremely busy launching the book and with everything else you do in your life. Um, truth be told, this is my second time listening to Sherry on this, and I've learned yet more things today. And the first time I already thought it was really interesting to look at meaning making in our lives, and it's a phrase that has stayed with me and that I've been sharing because I think it's so important to get in touch with who we are as human beings and what makes us function and what helps us replenish, right? Because of all the stress, frankly, we're under, maybe particularly these days, but in general anyway. And it's really important to learn how to replenish it in a practical way. And your approach, Sherry, is all about this. And as I said earlier, very much in keeping with what we do at Friendship Place in terms of mindfulness. We've had some activities in that area, and we would love to bring you back for a training with the entire staff. I think it would be very valuable. So we'll be talking about that when you have time. But again, thank you so much for being with us. So thank you for facilitating. As usual, it's great to work with you. And Chris, thank you for all these questions and
Yeah.
all this framing work on the call. To all of you, thanks again for joining us. We need your support. I'm so thankful for the help you give us. Be
Well,
well.
Chris,
Absolutely.
why don't you take us home? Thank you, JM.
Absolutely. So here's your first of all, we will share this on YouTube. So I've got a few charges for everyone on this call. Once you see it up on our YouTube link, please share that with friends because this was such an informative conversation. And it's so valuable, I think, to get this information out to everybody because it's not just an individual trauma, it's really a buildup of trauma that people that often impacts people. And so to be able to address to that is phenomenal. I also please, and I know this, not to be crass, but go buy this book. This is really wonderful. I read it in just a few days, and I really enjoyed it. The link's in the chat, but also very importantly, and I think Sherry, you'll echo this. Once you do read the book, if you've loved it as much and you will, leave an Amazon review. Those are gold to an author, the Amazon review, because it really does help them with the algorithm. It is so valuable to do that. So leave a great review on Amazon so other people can find it as well. Heck, buy two copies, one for you and one for a friend.
Great idea.
Any, Saul, is that about it? Shall we
That's
wrap?
it. Thanks, Sherry, for being
All right.
here. And
Thank
thanks for
you.
allowing
Thanks,
me to be
everybody.
in this space, everybody. Take care. Stay safe. Stay
Bye-bye.
connected.
Bye bye. I'm going to
Bye.
stop recording in three, two, one.